12 years ago, I scratch built a model for the first time. A big, boxy truck from the Irish Civil War, the Lancia Armoured tender. A few months ago, with the Copper State Models announcement, the Lancia also became the first model I've ever pre-ordered. Today, we're going to put it together. Welcome back to the bench, I'm Paul, and let's just take a look inside the box. The kit is packaged in a lid-opening cardboard box, protected by a decorated cover. The instructions are printed to look like a worn military document and feature period images of the markings included, as well as clear rendered images of the step-by-step construction. Marking options are printed in colour at the back of the booklet, 5 of which are relevant to this Irish version of the kit. As a pre-order bonus, Copper State Models also included this 94-page book which is filled with period photographs and text detailing different versions and deployments, as well as some walk-around images from a restored Lancia in a fictional livery. Now, onto the plastic. There are 8 sprues included, 1 transparent, and as you can see the moulding is crisp and the parts are laid out logically. Here you can see some of the lights and lanterns which are cast as single parts on a duplicated sprue, so we'll just need to cut off one of the arms on each side when it's time to connect them to the truck. This next set contains much of the engine and undercarriage of our vehicle. Again, rivets and details are well realised, and I was particularly impressed with the extremely fine texture on the radiator, even though this will be ultimately covered up. Again, we received duplicate sprues for the wheels, and these ones appear to be directly taken from Copper State's Lancia 17M, which shares this same type of wheel. The extra grills, plates, weapons, they're not used for this build, but I guess they might come in handy for the spares box. I'm not sure I like the 4 different connections onto the treads. This will make for an annoying cleanup, but I guess that's always the challenge with plastic wheels. Onto the next sprue, and I was immediately captured by the cushioned seat. Something about it is just extremely satisfying to me. We also get a number of smaller, thinner elements here, all of which look good, although I did notice some of the pieces like wooden benches and the storage box lack any kind of wood grain texture, which I think is a missed opportunity. Finally, we have our main body parts. We get a lonely lamp in one corner, and then the side armour plates with all the rivet details and vision ports that we'd expect. The cabin and the bed of the truck feature plenty more bolts and hinge details, including the escape hatches to the rear. But again, our wooden elements are completely smooth. We'll have to add our own grain later. The rest of the parts all look good, and we've practically no flash on any part, and limited seam lines. Ejection pin marks are broadly placed in areas that will be hidden during assembly, which is great to see. And I almost forgot the decals. They're printed by Cartograph and they look good. However, we won't know how they actually perform until we try to use them in a later episode. Construction begins with the engine, and so I began cutting parts from the frames and doing the little cleanup required. I was surprised with the amount of detail in this engine. It'll be ultimately covered by engine covers, which are in turn behind armour plating, and had me tempted to open up as many hatches and doors as possible to show off that it's in there. I'd never built a Copper State kit before, but this engine was a confidence-inspiring first step. Everything fit together well, and there was a good balance of moulded detail versus part count, looking at you, mini art. The long chassis pieces required a bit of unique cleanup in the form of clipping away these parts it called rail mounts. Could this mean we'll get the rail version of the Lancia in upcoming releases? Or perhaps a 3D printed conversion set or something? I sure hope so. In any case, this was an easy task to do before removing the cross bracing and sticking these 2 sides of the undercarriage together. I found it easiest to attach all of the parts to their correct places on one side before attaching the other half all at once. I actually stuck 2 of the braces in upside down here, so if you're building it, make sure the holes on these parts face down so that you can later glue in the exhaust. I realised and then fixed this mistake off camera. Next up, the instructions called for the 2 wooden planks that run along the chassis, and I wanted to add some texture and grain to these parts. For this purpose, I took out a metal wire brush and a metal scraper so I could protect my cutting mat from this next process. I used the brush quite aggressively and had to use way more pressure than I expected to actually scrape the plastic parts to create a grain. Obviously, I only dragged the brush along the plank in the direction that I wanted the grain to go. This texture was then exaggerated on the ends using a scribing tool and a scalpel. Here you can see the results of this process, which I hope you'll agree is a huge improvement from the smooth plastic parts given. I stuck these into position before following suit with the engine itself. I'd recommend doing this in the same session as the rest of the undercarriage, as The bit of give still in the drying glue definitely helped while squeezing it into place. The radiator comes in 2 halves and clicks right into place in front of the engine. The top of this piece will be visible and it'll be shining gold in the end. Next up came the back axles, which terminate in large round plates on either side, which our wheels will later stick onto. Then came the exhaust that I mentioned earlier, which sticks into 2 holes on the horizontal braces. The front axles are more conventional than the rear, with a peg on either side, and unfortunately they don't allow for posing of the wheels, turning from side to side. Onto the supports for the bed, and again I used a knife and a scriber to add the wooden texture to these parts. I find it amazing how much timber was used on this vehicle, and I think it would be such a shame to not represent that in scale on this model. Once these were stuck to our main assembly so far, there's one brace to add to keep them from falling over. Back again to texturing wood grain, which I was worried about for the floor of the truck bed. I didn't want to destroy the rivet and hinge details on this part, but I felt the risk would be worth it for the final effect, so I just went ahead and began scraping. Thankfully those details somehow survived the scraping, and so we were left with the best of both worlds. The driver's seat cushion was stuck into place, quite straightforward, and then the 2 halves of the fuel tank were stuck together and into place. This fuel tank was previously located outside of the armour plating on earlier versions of this vehicle, but I think its location beneath the benches here is a lot more logical. Speaking of the benches, I stuck down the metal frames that they'd later attach onto. Although it'll be functionally invisible in the end, I couldn't bear leaving the seam between the 2 parts of the fuel tank, so I filled it with putty and I cleaned away the excess. Pedals, gear sticks and handbrakes came next, and despite being quite thin, I had no issues in removing them from the sprues. The walk-around photos in the pre-order reference book show this support layout on the back of the driver's seat, which I found was not present on the kit supplied part. Therefore, I just got to work with some styrene strips to recreate the few raised parts I saw on the reference. While I was at it, all of these parts got the same wood grain texture from before. I made sure the new plastic stopped about 1 millimeter short of the bottom of the kit piece so that it would still fit into the slot, and then I glued it into place. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, I again textured the wooden benches before gluing them onto their supports, and once they were in, the cab saw the front plate and the steering wheel added. Finally, the driver's bench got its armrest sides, and that completed our interior detail. So, the 2 assemblies we worked on so far were stuck together, and it was onto our side armour pieces. Again, the kit parts are entirely smooth, which is fine, but I think we could enhance the appearance of the final model here by adding a very, very fine texture, which replicates the imperfections in some of the pitting seen in some of the references. I did this the same way probably everyone expects. I stippled on some thinned down putty to all the panels, avoiding details like the firing ports, and being careful not to swamp the panel lines. Once the putty was beginning to dry, I came back with a stiff old brush and I stippled again, which just roughens up the surface that small bit more. On the interior of the truck, I not only made sure to avoid the support structure, but also some of the areas that I knew would have parts glued into place later, just to ensure that I get a good bond at that step. The most important part of this process was to come back with a fine sandpaper once everything had dried, and knock down the most raised areas of texture, leaving us with a pitted but still smooth surface. I think this will look great when painted, and it'll make weathering much easier when our effects have some texture to actually grab onto. Both sides got some internal support stuck into place, as well as what I believe is the spare tyre rack. Wheels can be seen in a number of period photos in that central location, and I was almost tempted to cast one of the kit wheels to add this detail, but ultimately I just decided against it. I didn't want to make my life too difficult for painting, so for the time being I only attached one side of the armour as well as the back plate, allowing us easy access to the interior for painting. I decided to glue the rear door in an open position to make the final appearance a bit more dynamic. With the rear of the model mostly complete, we moved forward to the engine again and added the necessary grills and covers to hide our work from earlier. I would have loved to pose all of this open, but I couldn't figure out how it all interacted and opened with the extra armour plating on the Irish version, so I ended up just gluing it closed. There's two triangular pieces at the very front of the vehicle, which the instructions said to glue in place before adding the side armour plates to the engine. I did this on one side, before removing the triangle and sticking these armour parts together first and then adding them to the model on the other side, which I found to be easier. This was then completed with a few wing nuts and some bars, before the big square front plate sticks into place. We have the hand crank to add to the bottom, before wiggling this big bathtub shaped piece to the underneath, which was actually very satisfying when it went in. A textured wooden box was added to one side of the chassis, and then the fenders were stuck into place on either side. These pieces are really fine and nicely represent the very flimsy metal they were in reality. The sides each received a grab handle, which seemed like they would have been a pain to actually use in reality, and those were followed by the lights specific to this Irish version. The connections did not inspire confidence. I thought the parts would end up far too heavy for such a small support, but somehow they all stuck into place with no issue. My views on the kit so far are that the fit and the detail have been excellent. I really like the schemes included, and I'm glad this Irish subject is finally getting some love. I think the pre-order reference book is incredible, and I hope that this is or becomes available for purchase separately, because references online are extremely limited, and some of the walk-around pictures really inspired me to add some extra details that I otherwise would have missed. I do think it would have been nice if Copper State had included some limited textures on the wooden and the steel parts, although they were easy and fun to add, so in a way I'm glad I got to do them myself. Believe it or not, I was able to assemble this kit in a single, albeit long, evening at the workbench, and it went together a treat. As always, thank you so much for spending the time to watch this video today, and if you want to see more of this build, then please let me know in the comment section below, and subscribe to make sure you don't miss out. I plan on doing the box art scheme with the "We have no time for trucers" scrawled on the side of the Lancia, so I'll see you in the next one for that.